The Field of Paper Flowers. The machinery keeping his mother alive didn't need to operate at all times. It might be healthier if it did. But Viveka liked to leave the hospital and wander around the underground halls. Too often, perhaps, frustrating Nevene, as he had to help her back when the toxic buildup gave her symptoms of the world's spinniest case of vertigo. He hated seeing her that way. Her disease was not well understood. They knew the symptoms and the prognosis, neither of them pleasant. And the cause, of course. The cause had been known before the condition. But to discover a treatment, they'd need diagnostic tools they could never get in this forsaken colony, stuck in a technological limbo, built with the most advanced inventions known to mankind, yet teetering now on the brink of tumbling back to the Middle Ages. Taking that into account, it was a miracle they'd managed to patch up the dome on the surface, really. A costly one. 3 lives lost for nothing but a distant, hesitant hope. Despite their efforts, the scientists couldn't bring the abandoned dome back to its previous functionality. It was no longer able to purify the contaminated air inside it, and so the colony remained stuck in the underground complex. But the airlock was tight again, and that led people believe that one day they would figure out the next step. One day they would find a way to return to their settlement on the surface. But they didn't. There was no they. There was only her, Viveka. The hope born from the mangled resurrection of the dome was enough for her to make it all happen. Stop brooding already. She tugged at the cable attached to her spine, urging her son to move it. I'm not brooding. I'm taking a moment to appreciate everything. In this shitty hole? Get these out and let's go. Viveka was not a sentimental woman. If she could rush out and get the event, the one she was literally dying for, over and done within a second, she would. Efficiency above all. Don't waste another minute of your new life dwelling here in the past, she added. That was it for the morning chat. Nevene helped her remove the remaining cables and handed her the walker, then quickly cleared the way of various books scattered around the floor. Dragging his mother into existential debates was the one way he had of making her stay put at the hospital. The underground system of warehouses that had become their home after it had been repurposed into a makeshift living complex never got a name. Every now and then someone tried to smuggle one into the public opinion, but the only word that ever stuck in relation to this place was temporary. And maybe to some, the 23 years down here was but a phase in their lives, but at 19, Nevene felt it eternal. Together with his mother, he passed by the rows of temporary doors implanted into temporary walls to create temporary zones of privacy some called homes. And here and there, on support poles, grungy metal sheets, narrow wooden planks, Nevene saw the name Temporary shine in neon glow letters, announcing the town's unofficial name. Because as far as he was concerned, it was home, and it deserved a name, whatever it would be. He knew the LED lights weren't truly there. They were a projection of his mind, but he enjoyed the bits of augmented reality produced by his brain. He had started seeing them about 8, maybe 9 years ago, and as far as he knew no one else did. Viveka had said some wiring in his brain must have gone awry. These things happen, just don't tell other kids about it, she'd warned him. They will mock you even more. He didn't want that, so he listened. At the end of the winding alley waited the elevators, and in front of them, the colony. About 200 souls, as always divided into two groups for an inexplicable reason. They seemed to gravitate to the same people no matter what, no matter where. And though at a glance they looked no different from one another, there was something in the way they stood, the ways they moved, those little motions almost like ticks, that wouldn't let them blend with the other group. The crowd parted to let Viveka and Nevene through, as if they were conducting a holy ceremony of some kind. She must go first, walk in the spiritual entourage of the free men that gave their lives so this day could come to pass. Today, even the 4 leaders stepped aside. "They're only letting me go first, because otherwise the crowd would jeer them out of existence," Viveka said. Well, she didn't say it out loud, but Nevene heard it all the same in the look she sent the bunch. They heard it too, all right, but all they could do was smile and nod. Without her, there would be no breathable air in the dome, and with that, no sun, no food that had any taste at all, no hope of ever living a normal life. Nevene had his own little part in the whole thing, but his mother had robbed him of any heroics. His foot had never stepped onto the surface with her. "Between you and me," she'd said once, though it wasn't a secret she kept too diligently, "if my son were to kick the bucket together with me here, I wouldn't bother with any of this in the first place. You're staying underground." Nevene liked to believe there was more to it than the evolutionary efficiency for the sake of sending her genes into the future, but he couldn't be sure. He helped Viveka get the cumbersome, medieval-born walking helper into the industrial elevator. On the back wall of the spacious cabin hung 4 gas masks, all that remained of the backup protective equipment after the 11 messengers had taken the rest to leave the planet and seek help on the homeworld. Hopefully their trip outside of the dome hadn't been a long one, as it had later turned out that these masks couldn't fully protect from the toxin particles. The 3 scientists that had left temporarily to repair the dome fell victim to the colony's ignorance. They'd never had a chance to limit their exposure or counteract it in the ways Viveka later had. The illness took them in mere months. She got to suffer for years. Viveka took 1 mask off the hook and stared at it for a moment. Despite the protection being unreliable, when used with some healthy mistrust, it was better than nothing. She had never gone out not wearing it. "Put it on," Nevene said, joining her by the mask rack. "The idea here is, that's not necessary," his mother replied, though she knew he wasn't stupid. "Just do it." Nevene took the mask from her hands and put it on her face. He met her annoyed eyes on the other side of the visor and smiled. He whispered, "Do it exactly like in your fantasy. I won't judge if you do. I'll judge if you don't." His mother fastened the mask, then turned to the people outside the elevator and gestured to send the thing up to the surface. Before the door closed with a creak, Nevene caught a wide glance of the whole place and tried to memorize it as if it was a picture taken by a camera. They could hate temporary, call it a dungeon, a lifeless prison, but it was an amazing stroke of luck that the place had everything they needed to survive here for 2 decades. Life support systems independent from the dome, hydroponic farms with sun lamps. If they were religious at all, they could suspect one god or another had chosen to take care of them. And up they went. Just the 2 of them. The pioneers. Nevene put on the 2nd mask to complete the fantasy. He wouldn't waste the opportunity to make his mother feel a genuine human emotion. What an unprecedented event! Viveka grabbed his hand, Stop shaking already. You're making me into a robot in comparison. The elevator stopped. The doors opened, and they entered a claustrophobic chamber leading down to a primitive water lock, not that different from a toilet installation. The one good thing about it was that it wasn't filled with water, but the incredible Eka, the favorite invention of both the scientists and kids alike. Nevene took his mother's walker away to carry it. The gel wouldn't let Viveka fall. A deep breath, and they descended down the ramp into the squishy barrier which kept all contamination at bay. Eka surrounded them like pudding, but left not a speck of the goop on them as they emerged on the other side, in yet another tiny shack. Nevene stayed back and let his mother be the one to open the door. She pushed it with no hesitation. The bright rays of sunlight barged into the building and filled every crevice, even taking on the mighty pink Ekapul in an attempt to invade the little tunnel. Viveka stepped onto the threshold and reached for her mask. All Nevene could see for now was his mother's feeble silhouette surrounded by the bright halo of the local star's light. She straightened up, and he took in this image, trying to imprint it in his memory too, for he'd probably never see anything this precious again. But oh, did he have to make it quick. There was one singular twitch of hand that ensured Nevene that his mother was not, in fact, an emotionless robot. And then, click, unlocked. She pulled the mask off. Her chest moved, and Nevene realized he himself was still holding the breath he took before going into the Eka lock. Viveka turned around and stepped back, beckoning her son forth. There it was. The world. The real one. The one she had promised him on the day he'd learned to understand words. He found himself paralyzed. What if it wasn't good? What if he didn't like it? What if it showed on his face as he took off the mask? What if it ruined it all for her? Temporary was his home. What if he loved it as much as Viveka loved her home planet? Breathe, boy, she said, and loud, so I can hear it. Nevene closed his eyes and slid the mask off. But his lungs didn't want to take in the air that killed his mother and the man who'd fixed the broken dome. He nearly panicked and put the protection back on, but Viveka knew him too well for that. She snatched it out of his shaking fingers, and as the burn of the held breath started in his chest, he had no choice but to inhale. The air smelled. It was neither good nor bad. It was simply present. The constantly recycled machine air of the warehouse town had nothing on this, nothing. He took a step outside, eyes still closed. The ground felt alive, soft somehow and moist. He'd seen grass before, of course, there were planters of it cultivated in the labs, but he'd never walked on it. Son, open your goddamned eyes. He did. And all this air purification was for naught, for he plain stopped breathing again. The sky visible through the shimmering glass surface of the dome was what got him. And then the whole rest of it. The many plants immune to the toxin grew wild all over the area. Viveka had described the surface in many ways, but there was one that truly hit the nail on the head. Alive. Come on, she said now, blind to Nevene's overwhelming wonder. rushing to show off her accomplishment, impatient as ever. "The field wants to meet you." And when Nevena looked at her as if he couldn't comprehend the words she'd spoken, she added, "I get it. It's beautiful. You'll have all the time in the world to sigh over it. Soon. But not now." It wasn't far. Were it not for the rich foliage and trees, they could see it from any one point under the dome. Viveka called it the field of paper flowers. And once Nevena saw it, he understood why. Sprawling in a circle, far as the eye could see, was a valley filled with blooming roses white as sheet. They swayed gently in the fall wind and rustled, filling the area with unforgettable hum. In a year's time, they'd purified the air captured under the hermetic dome. "Do you feel anything?" Viveka asked. "So many things," Nevena whispered. She rolled her eyes. "Not emotionally, physically." "No. Should I?" She shrugged, and any other time he might have wondered what it meant, or why she'd asked this question. This time, though, he'd barely even heard it. "I want to find a way to cure you," he said. Viveka shook her head no. "You have to know when to call it quits, son," she said. "I've waited a long time for this moment. I've fought for it for a long time. And I've won. I'll go out a victor." "I can't imagine the world without you." "Yesterday you couldn't imagine the world beyond the warehouse. Things change, and you will change alongside them." 36 years ago, 200 people had been sent to this almost habitable planet to build a small, self-sustained colony under a marvelous dome capable of protecting the colonists from the toxic atmosphere. They had a mission, too, one that could take decades, maybe even longer. They were meant to examine the unusual, conductive crust of the planet and see if it could kickstart the technology that could help save their contaminated, dying homeworld suffering after a near-apocalyptic accident. The dome malfunction brought an abrupt end to any such plans and turned the expedition into one focused solely on survival. The 11 sent away to seek help returned only a message, which said help would not be coming. The homeworld nations could not afford it. The colony of Zelem, as they named their city under the dome, had been written off. A distant whir of the elevator resonated through the ground. The others were coming to greet the field. And suddenly, Nevena felt fear.